A stranger found a wallet behind a wall and solved a 30-year mystery. The August sun was a hammer, beating down on the asphalt of Route 119, turning the air into a shimmering, suffocating blanket. For Leo, it was just another Tuesday, another day of trudging along the scorched shoulder of the highway, the roar of passing trucks a constant, deafening companion. His job was simple, brutal, and thankless, clearing brush and debris from the state-maintained verges. It was the kind of work that made a man invisible. Motorists saw the orange vest, not the person inside it. They saw a function, a piece of state equipment, not the 42 years of disappointments that had led him to this patch of sun-blasted nowhere. He swung the scythe with a practiced, weary rhythm, the blade whispering through the dry weeds. Sweat dripped from his brow, stinging his eyes, tracing clean paths through the grime on his face. He was working his way along a stretch of old stone wall, a relic from a time before highways, when this land was just fields and farms. The stones were grey and mottled, with lichen baked by decades of relentless sun. Most of it was crumbling, returning to the earth from which it came. It was during a swing, a particularly vicious hack at a stubborn knot of kudzu, that he heard it. Not the familiar thwack of steel on weed, but a dull, hollow thud. He paused, leaning on the scythe, his breath coming in ragged gasps. He'd struck one of the larger, more foundational stones, but the sound was wrong. It wasn't the solid crack of hitting stone. It was softer, like hitting a rotted log. Curiosity, a long-dormant instinct, stirred within him. He knelt, the rough denim of his jeans scraping against the gravel. He pulled away the clinging vines of ivy and kudzu, their leaves dusty and brittle. The stone he'd hit was about 2 feet square, set deep into the earth. But as he ran his calloused fingers along its edge, he felt a fissure, a clean, straight line that didn't look like a natural break. It was a seam. He pushed. The stone didn't budge. He pushed harder, grunting, his shoulder digging into the rough surface. It gave a little, scraping against its neighbors. A puff of cool, musty air escaped from the gap, carrying the scent of damp earth and something else. Something metallic and faintly sweet, like old pennies and decay. He wedged the tip of his scythe into the opening and pried. With a groan of protest, the stone pivoted inward, revealing a dark, tight cavity behind it. It wasn't a big space, just a small, man-made hollow, barely large enough to hide something. And there, nestled in the dirt and cobwebs, was a wallet. It wasn't just a wallet, it was a time capsule. The leather was dark brown, almost black, but warped and stiff, the stitching frayed. It looked like it had been molded by years of pressure and moisture. He reached in, his fingers brushing against something brittle that crumbled at his touch. Dried leaves. He lifted the wallet out. It was heavier than he expected. He stood up, turning it over in his hands. The leather was cold, despite the oppressive heat. He could feel the distinct, hard outlines of its contents. A lump of dread, cold and heavy, settled in his stomach. This wasn't just lost. This was hidden. Deliberately. His hands trembled slightly. As he fumbled with the fold, the leather creaked like an old door hinge. Inside, the compartments were stuffed thick. The first thing he saw was the driver's license, encased in a cloudy yellowed plastic sleeve. He wiped it with his thumb, trying to clear the condensation that had formed on the inside. The face that stared back at him was young, achingly so. A girl, maybe 19 or 20. She had a wide, hopeful smile, her eyes crinkling at the corners. Her hair was long and feathered back in a style that screamed late 80s or early 90s. The name on the license read, Julianne Maxwell. The issue date was 1991. The expiration date was 1995. A lifetime ago, beneath the license. A stack of bills, 20s, old ones, with the smaller portrait of Andrew Jackson. He counted them. $500. A fortune for a kid that age. Back then, tucked behind the cash was a photograph. Its colors faded to a pale ghost of what they once were. It was Julianne again, this time with her arms slung around another girl. They were on a beach, squinting into the sun, their faces alight. with the kind of pure, unadulterated joy that only the young seem to possess. Julian was wearing a silver locket. He set the photo aside and continued his excavation. A student ID from a local community college, a library card, a ticket stub from a movie, The Silence of the Lambs, a folded, creased piece of notebook. Paper. He carefully unfolded it, his thick fingers clumsy with the fragile document. It was a letter, written in a looping feminine cursive. My dearest J.F. You're reading this, it means I didn't have the guts to say it to your face. Coward, I know. But you get so defensive when I bring him up. I have to try one last time. Please, please, don't go with him tonight. I have a bad feeling. It's not just that he's older. It's the way he looks at you, not like you're a person, like you're a prize, like something he owns. He scares me, Jay, the way he talks about his father, the power, the money. It's like he thinks the rules don't apply to him. And maybe they don't, but they apply to you. To us. I saw the bruise on your arm last week. You said you walked into a door. We both know that's a lie. Don't throw your life away for him. He's not worth it. No one is. If you won't do it for yourself, do it for me. Meet me at the diner. We'll just drive. Anywhere, I don't care. Just away from here. Away from him. I'll wait until midnight. All my love, always, S. Leo's. Blood ran cold. He read the letter again, the words seeming to lift off the page, charged with a desperate 30-year-old urgency. Don't go with him tonight. He looked back at the driver's license. Julianne Maxwell. The name tickled a distant memory, a headline from a yellowed newspaper in his mind's eye. A girl who had vanished. A local tragedy that had faded into folklore. Final item in the wallet was tucked into a small, hidden pocket behind the credit card slots. It was a single, small, brass key. It was old, ornate, the kind used for a diary or a small jewelry box. Attached to the key was a tiny, tarnished silver tag, no bigger than his thumbnail. He had to hold it right up to his eye to make out the faint, engraved inscription. It was a number, 217. A sudden roar from the highway made him jump. A thundered past, shaking the very ground he stood on. The gust of wind it created snatched the fragile letter from his hand. He watched, horrified, as it fluttered out onto the asphalt. It landed for a second, then was caught by the turbulence of another passing car, and then another. It was lifted, tossed, and then disintegrated, torn into 100 tiny pieces of confetti that scattered in the wind, gone, just like that. The only evidence of that desperate plea, erased. Leo stood frozen, his heart pounding against his ribs. The wallet felt like a brand in his hand. This wasn't just a lost item, it was a story. A final, desperate message from the past. He scares me. J. Who was he? Who was S? And what happened to Julianne Maxwell on that long-ago night? He looked from the empty cavity in the wall to the wallet in his hand. This was a secret. A secret that had been lying in wait, silent and patient, for 3 decades. He knew, with a certainty that chilled him to the bone, that he shouldn't have found it. This was a place where secrets were meant to die. By finding it, he had done more than disturb some old stones. He had disturbed a grave. He felt a sudden, paranoid urge to put it back, to slide the stone into place and walk away, pretend he'd seen nothing, let the secret sleep for another 30 years. It was safer that way. Getting involved was trouble, and Leo had had enough trouble for one lifetime. His parole officer's voice echoed in his head. Keep your head down, Leo, no trouble. You're on thin ice. But he couldn't. He looked at the smiling face on the driver's license. The hopeful eyes. The girl on the beach, so full of life. She wasn't just a faded photograph. She was real, and someone had silenced her. Someone had taken her life and buried her memory in a wall on the side of a forgotten highway. He shoved the wallet deep into the pocket of his jeans, the cold leather pressing against his thigh. He looked around, his eyes scanning the empty fields, the distant line of trees, the endless, indifferent ribbon of road. The world suddenly felt different. Charged, he felt like he was being watched. The rustle of leaves in the wind sounded like a whisper. The glint of sun on a faraway car window looked like a spying eye. He grabbed his scythe and the heavy-duty trash bag. His movements jerky and hurried. He had to get out of there. He worked his way back toward his pickup truck, a beat-up Ford Ranger parked a quarter-mile down the road. Every step was heavy, his mind racing. The wallet was a weight, not just in his pocket, but on his soul. He had stumbled into the last act of a play he didn't understand, and he had a terrifying feeling that the other actors were still out there somewhere, and they wouldn't be happy that the curtain was being raised. As he reached his truck, he glanced back at the stone wall. From this distance, it looked innocuous. Just an old, crumbling line of rocks. No one would ever know the secret it held. No one but him. He felt a profound and terrifying loneliness. He was the sole keeper of Julianne Maxwell's last moments. He threw his gear into the bed of the truck and slid into the driver's seat. The vinyl was scorching hot, but he barely noticed. He started the engine, the familiar rumble doing little to soothe his frayed nerves. As he pulled out onto the highway, he checked his rearview mirror. The road behind him was empty. But the feeling of being watched didn't go away. It intensified, crawling up his spine like a spider. He drove, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. He didn't know where he was going. He just knew he couldn't go back. Not to his cramped, lonely apartment. Not to the life he had known just an hour before. That life was over. The man who had woken up that morning to clear brush on the side of the road was gone. In his place was someone else. A witness, a participant. He drove 4 miles, the sun dipping toward the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and blood red. He finally pulled over at a desolate rest stop, the only other vehicle, a long-haul truck, its driver asleep in the cab. Killed the engine and sat in the deafening silence. The weight in his pocket, a constant, throbbing reminder. He took the wallet out again, his hands steadier now. He laid the contents out on the passenger seat. The smiling girl. The desperate, shredded plea. The $500. The key to nowhere. It was a puzzle with half the pieces missing. A ghost story whispered on the wind. He picked up the photograph of the 2 girls on the beach. He stared at it, trying to will it to give up its secrets. Who was the other girl? Sarah, Samantha, Susan. She was the key. She knew who he was. She knew everything. Was she still out there? Did she know what had happened to her friend? Or had she met the same fate? A wave of nausea washed over him. This was bigger than him. This was police business. He should just turn it in, drive to the nearest station, hand it over, and walk away. Let them handle it. It was the smart thing to do, the safe thing to do. But as he reached for his keys, another thought stopped him cold. The wallet had been there for 30 years. 30 years. The police had investigated her disappearance back then. They had searched, asked questions, and found nothing. The case went cold, relegated to a dusty file in a records room. Why? How could a girl just vanish? How could a secret like this stay buried for so long? It's the way he talks about his father, the power, the money. It's like he thinks the rules don't apply to him, and maybe they don't. The words from the letter echoed in his mind. Power, money. The kinds of things that make inconvenient problems and people disappear. The kinds of things that make police investigations quietly fade away. If he turned this in, would it just get buried again? Would some desk sergeant file it away, or worse, would it find its way back to the very people who had put it in that wall in the first place? He was trapped. To go to the police might be a death sentence for the truth. To do nothing would be to condemn Julianne Maxwell to be forgotten forever. Her final, desperate cry for help unheard. He was a nobody, a convicted felon trying to stay straight. He had no power, no influence, no resources. He was the last person on earth who should be taking this on, and yet, he was the only one who could. He looked at Julianne's face one last time. The hope in her eyes was a silent accusation. He couldn't put her back in the wall. He couldn't let her be forgotten. He had to know. He had to find out what happened to her. He had to find S. He had to find him. He carefully placed everything back in the wallet, except for the small, ornate key. He held it in his palm, its brass teeth sharp against his skin. A key to a diary? A jewelry box? A locker? 217. It was the only tangible lead he had. A tiny, 30-year-old key. It was next to nothing. But it was also everything. He started the truck again, a new, terrifying resolve hardening within him. He pulled back onto the highway, but this time, he had a destination. He was driving toward the town on Julianne's driver's license. The town where she had lived, and laughed, and vanished. The town where the secrets were kept. He didn't know what he would find there. He didn't know if he was driving toward answers or toward his own grave. He only knew that he had to go. The ghost of Julianne Maxwell was in his passenger seat now, and she wouldn't let him rest until he found her justice. The sun had set, plunging the world into darkness, and for the first time in a long time, Leo was afraid of what the morning would bring. The road ahead was dark and empty, a perfect mirror for the future he had just chosen. The town of Northwood hadn't so much grown as it had curdled. What was once a quaint Rockwellian slice of New England, nestled in a valley carved by the Ash River, had soured over the past 30 years. The old textile mill that had been the town's heart now stood as a skeleton of brick and broken glass. A monument to a dead industry. The once bustling Main Street was a sad parade of empty storefronts and for lease signs. The only businesses that seemed to thrive were the liquor store, the pawn shop, and the imposing marble-fronted bank that bore the name Hadley. Hadley Trust. The name was everywhere. On the Little League uniforms, on the welcome sign, at the edge of town, on the new wing of the underfunded public library. The Hadleys weren't just a family in Northwood. They were an institution. A dynasty that had owned the town for generations. Julianne Maxwell had been a ghost here for 3 decades. A cautionary tale whispered by mothers to their daughters. A faded missing poster that had long since been peeled from the community bulletin board. She was the girl who had run away, they said. The wild child who couldn't handle the quiet life and had sought bigger, brighter things. That was the official story. The one that had settled over the town like a comfortable lie. But there was another story. A darker one, murmured in hushed tones in the back booths of the town's only diner. A story that involved a boy, a car, and a powerful family with much to lose. This was the story that Leo was chasing, and it led him to a woman named Sarah Jenkins. He found her name on a microfiche copy of the 1991 high school yearbook at the Hadley Public Library. He'd spent hours scrolling through the grainy black and white images, his eyes aching, until he found Julianne's senior portrait. And right next to it, in the best friends candid section, was the other girl from the beach photograph. The caption read, Jules Maxwell and Sarah Connolly, inseparable since kindergarten. A quick search of town records told him that Sarah Connolly had become Sarah Jenkins 10 years later. She'd married a local contractor, had 2 kids, and never left Northwood. She now owned a small flower shop on a side street just off the decaying main dot. The shop was called Petal and Stem, a splash of color in a sea of gray. The bell above the door chimed a cheerful, delicate sound that was completely at odds with the knot of fear in Leo's gut. The air inside was thick with the sweet, cloying scent of lilies and damp earth. A woman with tired eyes and a kind, weary face looked up from a bouquet of white roses she was arranging. Her hair was shorter now, streaked with gray, but it was her, the girl from the beach. Can I help you? She asked, her voice soft. Leo's throat was dry. He felt like an intruder, a grave robber. He was about to shatter this woman's carefully constructed peace. Are you Sarah Jenkins? Formerly Sarah Connolly. Her hands stilled. A flicker of something not quite fear, but a deep, buried caution passed over her eyes. I am. Who's asking? He didn't know how to do this. There was no gentle way. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the wallet. He laid it on the counter between them, on a bed of discarded fern leaves. I found this, he said, his voice barely a whisper. Sarah stared at the wallet. Her face, which had been pale, went sheet white. Her breath caught in her throat. She didn't touch it. She just stared, as if it were a venomous snake. The color, the shape, the way the leather was warped, it was a ghost from her deepest, most private nightmare, where she breathed, her eyes wide with a terror that looked 30 years old. On the side of Route 119, hidden inside an old stone wall. Her hand flew to her mouth, stifling a sob. Tears welled in her eyes, spilling over and tracing paths through the light dusting of powder on her cheeks. "Oh God," she whispered. "Oh God, Julianne." She finally reached out a trembling hand and touched the wallet, her fingers tracing the frayed stitching as if reacquainting herself with a long-lost friend. She knew what it was. She had been there the day Julianne bought it at a flea market. She looked up at Leo, her gaze sharp and piercing, the grief momentarily replaced by suspicion. "Why are you bringing this to me? Why not the police?" "The letter," Leo said quietly. "There was a letter inside. It blew away before I could save it, but I read it. It was from you." The fight went out of her. She slumped against the counter, the roses forgotten. The bell on the door chimed again, but neither of them looked up. She knew which letter he meant. The last words she had ever written to her best friend. A plea. That had gone unanswered. "You shouldn't have come here," she said, her voice hollow. "You have no idea what you've just stepped into." "I think I do," Leo said. "The letter mentioned a man. Someone you were afraid of. It said he had a powerful father." Sarah let out a bitter, humorless laugh. "Powerful doesn't even begin to describe it. The Hadleys don't just own this town, they own the people in it. They own the police. They own the judges. They own the truth." And there it was. The name, Hadley. The name on the bank, the library, the welcome sign. Who was he? Leo pressed, his voice gentle but firm. Which Hadley was it? Sarah wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, her movements jerky. She looked around the small shop, at the cheerful buckets of daisies and carnations, as if seeing it all, for the first time. This little life she had built for herself, this fragile sanctuary, was about to be bulldozed. "Caleb," she whispered, the name tasting like poison in her mouth. Caleb Hadley. Caleb Hadley. Even Leo knew that name. Not the son, but the father. Senator Caleb Hadley, a man who had been a fixture in state politics for 40 years. A man known for his folksy charm, his iron fist, and his carefully cultivated image as a champion of the common man. He was retired now, a revered elder statesman. But back in 1991, his son would have been the town prince. No, Sarah corrected, seeing the misunderstanding on Leo's face. Not the senator, his son, Caleb Hadley Jr. Everyone just called him Cal, the antagonist, the boy with the powerful father, the one who looked at Julianne like a prize. "Tell me about him," Leo said. "Tell me about Julianne." And so, the story spilled out of her, a torrent of grief and guilt that had been dammed up for 3 decades. She spoke of their friendship, a bond forged in childhood that was supposed to last a lifetime. She spoke of Julianne, not as the tragic victim, but as the vibrant, fierce, and sometimes reckless girl she had been. A girl with a painter's eye and a poet's soul, who felt everything too deeply. A girl who had been swept off her feet by the handsome, charismatic, and dangerous Cal Hadley. He was like a movie star, Sarah said, her voice distant, lost in the past. He had this smile that could melt you, but his eyes were cold, empty. He bought her things, a car, jewelry. He promised her the world, but it was all a cage. She described a whirlwind romance that had quickly soured into a toxic obsession. Cal was possessive, jealous, his charm giving way to a terrifying temper. He isolated Julianne from her friends, from her family. The story of the bruise on her arm was just one of many. Sarah had watched her best friend, the strongest person she knew, slowly being erased, replaced by a frightened, haunted version of herself. The night she disappeared, Sarah continued, her voice cracking, was the night of the Hadley annual Founders' Day Gala. It was the biggest social event of the year. Cal was supposed to take her. That was the night I wrote her that letter. I slipped it into her bag when she wasn't looking. I begged her to run away with me. She had waited at the diner, just as she'd promised, nursing a cold coffee, until well past 2 in the morning. Julianne never showed up. No one ever saw her again. I went to the police, Sarah said, her eyes flashing with a 30-year-old anger. I told them everything. I told them about Cal, about his temper, about my fears. The chief, a man who had been on the Hadley payroll his entire life, just patted my hand and told me not to worry. He said Julianne was just a flighty girl, probably ran off with some artist. He said Cal was a good boy from a good family. He was devastated, they said. Heartbroken. The investigation was a sham. Key witnesses were never interviewed. Cal Hadley's car was never searched. His alibi that Julianne had broken up with him and he'd spent the night at home alone was accepted without question. The case was closed within a month. Julianne Maxwell was officially a runaway. But you didn't believe it, Leo stated. It wasn't a question. I knew, Sarah said, her voice dropping to a fierce whisper. I knew he killed her. I knew it as sure as I know my own name. He got rid of her, and his father cleaned it up. They buried her, and they buried the truth right along with her. The weight of her words hung in the fragrant air of the shop. This wasn't just a cold case, it was a conspiracy. A cover-up orchestrated by the most powerful family in the state. A family that had bought the silence of an entire town. And then there was the hidden witness. There was someone else. Sarah said, her gaze turning inward again. Someone who saw something that night. A boy named Marcus Thorne. He worked as a busboy at the Hadley estate. He was a quiet kid, kind of an outcast. He was there, at the gala. Marcus Thorne. The third piece of the puzzle. The day after Julianne disappeared, Sarah explained, I saw Marcus in town. He looked like he'd seen a ghost. He was pale, shaking. He avoided my eyes. I tried to talk to him, but he just mumbled something about quitting his job and ran off. A week later, his family moved away, just packed up and left in the middle of the night. No one ever heard from them again. You think he saw what happened, Leo said. I think he saw Cal Hadley do something to Julianne, and I think the Hadleys paid his family to disappear and to keep their mouths shut. It would have been easy for them. A little money to a family with nothing, a threat of what would happen if they ever came back. That's how the Hadleys operate. So, there it was. The victim, Julianne Maxwell, the vibrant girl, silenced forever. The antagonist, Cal Hadley, the prince of the town with a monster lurking behind his smile. And the witness, Marcus Thorne, the terrified boy who saw the truth and was forced to run from it. Leo looked at the wallet on the counter. It was no longer just a collection of old leather and paper. It was a testament, a piece of Julianne that had refused to be buried. He picked up the small brass key. 217. This was in the wallet, he said, holding it out to Sarah. She took it, her fingers closing around it. A flicker of recognition, of memory, crossed her face. Her art locker, she breathed. At the old community college, she kept a journal. She called it her book of truths. She drew in it, wrote poetry, poured out everything she was too scared to say out loud. She told me she always kept it locked in her art locker. She said it was the only place she felt safe. The key, it wasn't to a diary, it was to a locker. A locker that might still hold Julianne's final words. Her book of truths. The old community college had been abandoned for years. A casualty of the town's economic decline. It stood on a hill overlooking Northwood, a sprawling derelict campus of brick and ivy. If the locker was still there, if the journal was still inside, it could be the one thing the Hadleys hadn't been able to find and destroy. The one piece of evidence that could burn their kingdom to the ground. We have to go there, Leo said, his voice filled with a conviction. That surprised him. Sarah looked at him, a storm of fear and hope raging in her eyes. For 30 years, she had lived with this ghost. She had carried the weight of her unanswered letter, the guilt of not being able to save her friend. She had raised a family, built a life, all on the foundation of a terrible, unspoken truth. To go back now, to dig it all up, was to risk everything. Her safety, her family, the fragile peace she had fought so hard to maintain. But, in Leo's eyes, she saw something she hadn't seen in anyone else's. She saw a man with nothing to lose, a man who believed her, a man who was willing to walk into the dark with her. "The college is condemned," she said, her voice trembling. "It's dangerous. And if anyone sees us, if Cal finds out someone is digging into the past, he won't," Leo said. "We'll go tonight, after dark." She nodded slowly, her decision made. The fear was still there, a cold knot in her stomach, but for the first time in 30 years, it was joined by something else. A tiny, fragile flicker of hope. The hope that the truth had not been buried completely. The hope that, after 3 long decades of silence, Julianne Maxwell was finally going to speak. She looked from the key in her hand to the stranger standing in her shop, a man who had literally appeared on a roadside, and realized that her life, and the history of Northwood, was about to change forever. The ghosts of the past were rising, and they were crying out for justice. The night was moonless. The sky, a blanket of impenetrable black velvet. The old Northwood Community College campus was even more menacing in the dark, a collection of skeletal buildings silhouetted against the faint glow of the town below. The air was heavy and still, carrying the scent of wet, decaying leaves and mildew. Leo parked his truck in a thicket of overgrown pine trees a half-mile from the main entrance. The crunch of pine needles under the tires sounding like gunshots in the profound silence. Sarah was quiet in the passenger seat, her hands clenched tightly in her lap. She was wearing dark clothes, her face pale and drawn in the dim glow of the dashboard lights. The 30 years of silence had ended, and now she was an active participant in a dangerous exhumation. The fear was a living thing beside them in the truck. "Are you sure about this?" she whispered, her voice tight. Leo killed the engine, plunging them into near-total darkness. "We have to be," he replied, his own voice low. He handed her a heavy-duty flashlight. "Stay close. Don't turn this on unless I say so." They moved through the woods like ghosts, the only sound the soft tread of their boots on the damp earth. The campus was surrounded by a chain-link fence, topped with rusted barbed wire. A large section of it had collapsed, bent and twisted by a fallen oak tree. They slipped through the gap, entering the dead heart of the campus. The main building was a 3-story brick monstrosity, its windows like vacant eyes, many of them shattered. Ivy had crawled up the walls, its tendrils reaching into the broken panes like skeletal fingers. The main doors were chained and padlocked, but Leo had come prepared. He pulled a pair of bolt cutters from his backpack. The snap of the chain was shockingly loud in the stillness. It echoed across the empty quad, and both of them froze, listening, their hearts pounding. But the only reply was the chirping of crickets. The air inside the building was thick and cold, heavy with the dust of forgotten years. Their small flashlight beams cut through the oppressive darkness, revealing a scene of utter decay. Papers and overturned furniture littered the hallways. Graffiti covered the walls. The place felt haunted, not by spirits, but by the ghosts of 1,000 abandoned futures. The art department was on the 2nd floor, Sarah whispered, her voice trembling as she clung to the sleeve of Leo's jacket. At the end of the west wing, they moved cautiously down the long dark corridor, their footsteps echoing around them. Every creak of the floorboards, every rustle of a stray piece of paper in the draft, sent a fresh jolt of adrenaline through them. This was more than just trespassing. It was a desecration. They were walking through a tomb. They found the art wing. The hallway was lined with lockers, their metal doors dented and rusted. Many hung open, their contents long since looted or destroyed. Sarah's flashlight beam danced nervously from one number to the next. "Duzentos e cinco, duzentos e sete. It has to be." Down here, they reached the end of the hall, and there it was. Locker 217. It was intact, its blue paint faded, but the number still clearly stenciled in white. It was secured with a small, built-in combination lock, and below it, a keyhole. "This is it," Sarah breathed, a mixture of terror and elation. In her voice, Leo's hand was shaking as he pulled the small brass key from his pocket. For 30 years, this key had lain in the dark, waiting. He pushed it into the lock. It slid in smoothly. He took a deep breath and turned it. There was a soft, metallic click. The sound was deafening. The lock had opened. He pulled the key out, and slowly, reverently, pulled open the locker door. It groaned in protest, the hinges stiff with rust. A wave of musty air, the scent of old paper and dried paint, washed over them. The locker was not empty. Inside, resting on the top shelf, was a single leather-bound book. It was about the size of a textbook, its dark green cover faded and spotted with mildew. It was a simple, elegant journal. Julianne's Book of Truths. Sarah let out a choked sob, her hand flying to her mouth. It was real. After all these years, it was real. Leo reached in and carefully lifted the journal out. It was cool to the touch, its weight substantial. This was it, the truth. The story that had been silenced for 3 decades. He handed it to Sarah, his eyes meeting hers in the dim light. Her hands trembled as she took it, clutching it to her chest like a lost child. And then they heard it. A sound from the far end of the hallway, a soft scraping noise, followed by a footstep. They both froze, their blood turning to ice. They were not alone. Leo immediately switched off his flashlight, plunging them into absolute blackness. He pulled Sarah back, flattening them both against the cold metal of the lockers. His heart was a drum against his ribs. He could hear Sarah's ragged, terrified breathing next to him. Another footstep, closer this time, slow, deliberate. The sound of someone hunting. Who else could possibly be here? Who else knew about this place? The question answered itself with terrifying certainty. The Hadleys. They must have been watching Sarah. Or maybe they had been watching this place all along. Standing guard over their secret, a powerful beam of light cut through the darkness. Sweeping across the hallway, it moved methodically, playing over the graffiti-covered walls, the overturned desks, the debris on the floor. It was a professional's flashlight, a maglite. Its beam wide and intensely bright. The beam crept closer, illuminating the lockers across from them. Leo held his breath. He could feel Sarah shaking uncontrollably beside him. He put a hand on her arm, trying to steady her. His own body rigid with tension, that the beam hit their row of lockers. It lingered on locker 217, its door hanging slightly ajar. The light paused. The footsteps stopped. The silence that followed was worse than the noise. It was a heavy, loaded silence. The silence of a predator that knows its prey is near. Leo could imagine the man at the other end of the hall, his eyes narrowed, his senses on high alert. He knew they were there. Then, a voice cut through the silence. A voice that was calm, cultured, and laced with pure, chilling menace. "I know you're here," the voice said. It was a man's voice, smooth as silk. "I have to admit, I'm impressed. After all this time, to find the wallet, to find her. You've been very busy." Leo's mind raced. It was Cal Hadley. It had to be. He had been one step behind them. "This whole time you have something that belongs to me." The voice continued. The footsteps starting again, closer now, each one a hammer blow to Leo's nerves. "I think you know what it is. A little green book. It's a work of fiction, you understand. The ramblings of a very disturbed young woman. But it could be misinterpreted. It could cause my family embarrassment." The beam of light moved from the locker and began to sweep the floor, searching for them. It was getting closer. In a few seconds, it would be on them. They were trapped. The only way out was the way they had come. Down the long hallway, straight toward him. "Let's make a deal." Cal's voice echoed in the cavernous space. "You give me the book. You walk away. You forget any of this ever happened. You go back to your miserable little lives, and I go back to mine. No one has to get hurt. It's a very generous offer. The same one I made to Marcus Thorne all those years. Go." He was smart enough to take it. The beam was just feet away now. Leo could see the dust motes dancing in its light. He had to do something. He looked around wildly in the dark, his hands searching, and his fingers brushed against something hard and metallic on the floor, a piece of pipe, maybe 2 feet long, left behind by salvagers. He wrapped his hand around it. Its cold, rusted surface, a grim comfort. Last chance, Cal's voice said now, so close they could hear the soft scuff of his expensive leather shoes on the grimy floor. Don't be a hero. There are no heroes here. There are only ghosts. The beam of light hit them. It was blinding. Leo squinted, his eyes watering. He could see the silhouette of a man standing 20 feet away, tall and broad-shouldered. He was holding the flashlight in one hand. In the other, he was holding a gun. But it wasn't the gun that made Leo's blood run cold. It was the man's face, illuminated in the harsh glare. It was older, of course, thicker around the jowls, with lines etched around his eyes. But it was him. The cold, empty eyes were the same. The cruel twist of his lips was the same. It was Cal Hadley, and he was smiling. "There you are," he said, his voice dropping the pretense of civility. Now just a low, predatory growl. "You've caused me a great deal of trouble." He took a step forward, raising the gun. "Now, give me the book." Sarah let out a terrified whimper, clutching the journal to her chest. She was paralyzed by fear. Leo knew, in that split second, that Cal had no intention of letting them walk away. They knew too much. They were loose ends. The same kind of loose end Julianne had become 30 years ago. There was no choice. With a guttural yell, Leo lunged out of the darkness, swinging the pipe with all his might. He wasn't aiming for Cal, he was aiming for the hand holding the flashlight. The pipe connected with a sickening crunch of metal and bone. The flashlight flew from Cal's grasp, clattering across the floor and rolling away, its beam spinning wildly, plunging the hallway into a chaotic strobe of light and shadow. Cal screamed, a sound of pure rage and pain. "You bastard!" Leo didn't wait. He grabbed Sarah's arm. "Run," he screamed, pulling her with him. They scrambled down the hallway, away from Cal, their feet slipping on the slick floor behind them. A gunshot exploded, the sound a deafening roar in the enclosed space. The bullet whizzed past Leo's ear, so close he could feel its heat, and slammed into a locker, leaving a neat, black hole. They were running for their lives. Down the dark, haunted corridors of the dead college, with a killer behind them and a 30-year-old truth clutched in their hands. The escalating conflict had just turned brutal. The antagonist was no longer a ghost from the past. He was a real and present danger, and he would not let his secrets see the light of day. The hunt was on. The forest was a labyrinth of black trees and grasping thorns. Leo and Sarah crashed through the undergrowth, their lungs burning, branches whipping at their faces. Behind them, they could hear Cal Hadley's enraged shouts echoing through the woods. He was coming after them this way. Leo gasped, pulling Sarah toward the collapsed section of the fence. They scrambled through the gap and back into the relative safety of the pine grove where he'd parked the truck. They dove into the cab, Leo fumbling with the keys, his hands slick with sweat. The engine roared to life, and he slammed the truck into reverse, spraying pine needles and dirt as he spun the vehicle around and fishtailed onto the narrow access road. As they sped away, a figure emerged from the edge of the woods. Cal Hadley. He stood watching them, his arm held at an awkward angle, his face a mask of fury in the fleeting glare of their taillights. He didn't have a car. He must have parked somewhere else, come in on foot, expecting a quiet, simple retrieval. He had underestimated them. But Leo knew this was far from over. A man like Cal Hadley didn't just give up. He escalated. "He's not going to stop," Sarah sobbed from the passenger seat, clutching the journal so tightly her knuckles were white. "We saw his face. He knows we have it. He'll kill us." "Let him try," Leo said, his voice a low growl. The fear was still there, a cold acid in his stomach, but it was being burned away by a hot, righteous anger. He had been a victim his whole life. Pushed around, beaten down, locked up. For the first time, he was on the other side. He was fighting back. For Julianne, for Sarah, for himself. They didn't go to the police. They couldn't. Cal's words had confirmed their deepest fears. The same one I made to Marcus Thorne. The Hadleys had the system in their pocket. Walking into the Northwood police station with the journal would be like delivering it to Cal himself. They were on their own. They drove to a cheap, anonymous motel, 2 towns over, paying in cash. The room was small and smelled of stale cigarette smoke and bleach. Leo wedged a chair under the doorknob. Sarah sat on the edge of one of the beds, the journal resting on her lap. For a long time, neither of them spoke. The adrenaline was wearing off, leaving behind a bone-deep exhaustion and the stark, terrifying reality of their situation. Finally, Sarah looked up, her eyes red-rimmed but clear. "We have to read it," she said, but Leo nodded. He sat on the other bed as Sarah opened the book. The first page was a pencil sketch of a bird, a sparrow, taking flight. Underneath it, in familiar looping script, was a single line, "In case I forget how to fly." Sarah's hand trembled as she turned the page. And then, they began to read. The journal was everything Sarah had said it would be, and more. It was a raw, unfiltered account of the last year of Julian's life. It was filled with beautiful, haunting sketches, the way the light hit the dust motes in the art studio, the gnarled hands of an old man she saw at the bus station, the sad, empty eyes of a stray dog. It was filled with poetry, with fragments of dreams, with a desperate yearning hope for a life beyond Northwood, and woven through it all was the dark, creeping thread of Cal Hadley. At first, the entries were breathless, romantic. Cal saw my paintings today. He said I was a real artist. No one has ever looked at me the way he does. Like I'm the only person in the world. He was her patron, her champion. He promised to fund her art, to get her a gallery show in Boston, to give her everything she'd ever dreamed of. But the tone began to shift subtly. The entries grew darker, more fearful. He gets so angry over little things. I was 10 minutes late meeting him, and he didn't speak to me for the rest of the night. He just drove fast. It scared me. But then he bought me this beautiful bracelet to apologize. He said he just loves me so much, he can't stand to be without me, not even for a minute. The gifts became apologies. The passion became possession. The journal chronicled a classic, terrifying pattern of abuse. He belittled her art, calling it a silly hobby. He drove a wedge between her and Sarah, accusing her only friend of being jealous. He checked the odometer on her car. He listened to her phone calls. The cage was closing in. "He hit me today," one entry read. The handwriting shaky and blotted with what could have been tears. "It was my fault. I was talking to a boy from my English class. Cal saw us. He waited until we were in the car. He said if I ever embarrassed him like that again, he would ruin me. He said his father could make people disappear." He was smiling when he said it. "I see now, he doesn't love me. He wants to own me. I am a bird, and he has broken my wings." Leo and Sarah read in horrified silence, the only sound the soft rustle of the turning pages. This was the plot twist. This was the hidden clue, the confession from beyond the grave. This journal was the full, unvarnished conspiracy. It wasn't just about a possessive boyfriend and a tragic accident. It was about a calculated, systemic pattern of control and terror, enabled and protected by a powerful family. The final entries were from the day Julianne disappeared. She had made a decision. Sarah was right. "I have to leave. I can't live like this." I packed a bag. I took the $500 from my savings. I wrote essay note and tucked it in my wallet, praying she finds it. I'm going to meet her at the diner. We're just going to drive. I don't know where, and I don't care. Anywhere but here. And then, the last entry. A few hurried lines, scrawled at the bottom of the page. It was a bombshell. "Cal knows. I don't know how, but he knows. He just called. He's on his way over. He sounds calm. Too calm. He said he wants to talk. He said he has a surprise for me, a special place he wants to take me to celebrate my newfound freedom. He said it's near the old stone wall on Route 119. Oh God, he knows. He knows everything. This isn't a celebration. It's a trap." Leo and Sarah stared at the page, the words hanging in the air like a death sentence. It was a confession, a premonition. Julianne had known she was walking into her own murder. She had documented her own execution. The wallet, he must have taken it from her there, at the wall. He'd hidden it, a trophy from his kill, a secret symbol of his power. He never would have imagined that the one thing he didn't find, the journal, contained the key to unlocking his crime. "This is it," Leo whispered, his voice hoarse. "This is everything. This is the proof." The stakes had shifted. This was no longer about personal pain or a 30-year-old mystery. This was about bringing down one of the most powerful men in the state. The journal was a weapon, and Cal Hadley knew they had it. His attempts to intimidate them would now escalate into a brutal, no-holds-barred war. Their motel room door suddenly splintered, bursting open as the chair wedged beneath the knob shattered into pieces. Two large men in dark suits filled the doorway. They were not police. They were professionals. Hired muscle. Before Leo or Sarah could even react, the men were on them. One of them grabbed Sarah, wrenching the journal from her hands. She screamed, fighting back, but he was too strong. He threw her onto the bed like a rag doll. The other man came for Leo. Leo was strong, wiry from years of manual labor, but this man was a mountain. He moved with a brutal efficiency. He landed a single, devastating punch to Leo's gut, doubling him over, stealing his breath. As Leo gasped for air, the man drove a knee into his face. The world exploded in a flash of white-hot pain, and then went black. Leo awoke to the rhythmic, lurching motion of a vehicle. His head throbbed, and the coppery taste of blood filled his mouth. He was in the back of a van. His hands were bound behind him with zip ties. Across from him, Sarah was slumped against the wall, her eyes closed, a dark bruise forming on her cheek. She was breathing, thank God. The two men were in the front. The driver was silent, focused on the road. The other man, the one who had hit him, was in the passenger seat. He was holding the journal. He wasn't reading it. He was just holding it, waiting. "Where are you taking us?" Leo rasped, his voice raw. The man in the passenger seat turned, a cruel smirk on his face. "The boss wants to see you," he said. "He's very disappointed. He thought you'd be more reasonable. Now he has to clean up your mess." And Leo knew where they were going. They were going to see Cal Hadley, and he knew, with a chilling certainty, that this time there would be no escape. They were being driven to their own execution, to the same fate as Julianne Maxwell. The tension, which had been simmering for days, had now reached its absolute maximum. They were unarmed, captured, and being delivered directly into the hands of a monster. The journal was gone. Their one weapon had been taken. All hope seemed lost. The van turned off the main road, its tires crunching on a long gravel driveway. Through the grimy rear window, Leo could see they were approaching a massive estate. A sprawling mansion of stone and dark timber set against a backdrop of rolling hills and manicured lawns. The Hadley estate, a place where wealth and power had festered into a dark, generational evil. The van didn't go to the main house. It skirted around the back, toward a large, modern-looking barn that stood apart from the other buildings. It was too clean, too sterile for a real barn. It was a rich man's plaything. The doors slid open, and the van drove inside. The interior was cavernous and dimly lit. The air smelled of oil and antiseptic. In the center of the vast concrete floor, under a single harsh spotlight, stood Cal Hadley. His arm was in a sling, his face a thunderous mask of controlled rage. Standing beside him, looking frail and ancient in a perfectly tailored suit, was another man. Senator Caleb Hadley Sr. The thugs dragged Leo and Sarah from the van and forced them to their knees in front of the two men. The senator looked down at them, his eyes a pale, watery blue, but as cold and hard as chips of ice. There was no folksy charm here. This was the true face of power, stripped of its public relations polish. "This," Cal said, his voice dripping with venom as he gestured toward Leo and Sarah, "is the problem I was telling you about. Father, the senator's gaze was dismissive, as if he were looking at insects. A problem you created, Caleb. 30 years ago. A mess I had to clean up then, and a mess it seems I have to clean up now. Your sentimentality will be the ruin of us. You should have destroyed all of it. He gestured to the thug holding the journal. Give it to me. The thug handed the book to the old man. The senator took it, his long spidery fingers tracing the cover. He looked at Sarah. You must be the Connolly girl. You should have kept your mouth shut 30 years ago. You would have had a much quieter life. He then turned his cold eyes on Leo, and you, the ex-con, the nobody. You stick your nose into things that don't concern you, and this is what happens. You reach above your station. What did you do to her? Sarah cried out, her voice raw with grief and defiance. What did you do to Julianne? Cal laughed, a short, ugly sound. I gave her what she wanted. She wanted to be famous, an artist. Well, I made her immortal. She's a local legend. You murdered her, Leo spat, blood trickling from the corner of his mouth. Don't be so dramatic, the senator said, his voice calm and chilling. We corrected a mistake. We protected our family. That is what families do. That is what power is for. It's not for building libraries. It's for burying your mistakes so deep that no one can ever find them. He opened the journal, his eyes scanning a page. He shook his head with a look of profound disappointment. All this poetry and angst, so tedious. He walked over to a large steel incinerator in the corner of the barn. He opened the heavy door, revealing the faint orange glow of pilot lights within. No, Sarah screamed, struggling against the man holding her. You can't. I can, the senator said simply, and I will. He held the journal over the opening. This is how you erase the past. This is how you ensure the future. But, as he was about to drop the book into the flames, a voice echoed from the barn's entrance. I wouldn't do that if I were you, Senator. Everyone turned. Standing in the wide-open doorway, flanked by 2 uniformed state troopers, was a man. In a rumpled suit, he was older, with a weary, senile face. And behind him, looking terrified but resolute, was another man. A man with haunted eyes and a face that Leo and Sarah had only seen in a 30-year-old yearbook photo. Marcus Thorne, the hidden witness. Cal. Hadley's face went white. Marcus, he breathed. The name, a stunned whisper. Hello, Cal, Marcus said, his voice shaking but clear. It's been a long time. The senator was the first to recover. Trooper, what is the meaning of this? This is private property. I demand you arrest these men for trespassing. The detective in the rumpled suit stepped forward, holding up a badge. Senator Hadley, I'm Detective Miller, State Police Cold Case Division. And we're not here to arrest them, we're here to arrest your son. On what grounds? The senator demanded, his voice booming with a lifetime of authority. You have no evidence. You have nothing. Oh, but we do, Detective Miller said, his eyes locking onto Leo. We have a wallet, found at a crime scene your son conveniently directed us to. We have a journal, which I believe you're holding, that corroborates a witness statement. But most importantly, he paused, letting the tension build. We have a full, recorded confession. He held up a small, digital audio recorder. It turns out, Mr. Thorne here has an excellent memory. He remembered every word of the deal you offered him 30 years ago. The same deal your son was foolish enough to offer my undercover officer, who was posing as Mr. Thorne, just 2 hours ago. We have your son, on tape, admitting to silencing Julianne Maxwell to protect his political ambitions, admitting that you, Senator, helped him cover it up. He even told us where to dig. The cinematic payoff? It wasn't a courtroom bombshell. It was something quieter, colder, and far more devastating. The trap had been turned on its master. Cal stared at Marcus, his face a mask of disbelief and betrayal. You talked. Marcus took a hesitant step forward. For 30 years, I've lived with what I saw that night. I saw you drag her from your car, Cal. She was fighting you. I heard her scream. I saw you hit her. I saw her fall. And then, I saw you put her in the trunk. I ran. I was just a kid. I was terrified. Your father gave my family money, more money than we'd ever seen. He told us to leave, to never come back, or he'd destroy us. His voice broke, thick with emotion. But I never forgot her. I never forgot her face. When the detective found me, I knew I couldn't run anymore. I had to tell the truth. For her, the senator's composure finally cracked. His face contorted in a snarl of pure hatred. With a roar of fury, he threw the journal into the incinerator. The pages instantly blackened, curled, and burst into flames. There, he shrieked, his voice a reedy, panicked screech. No evidence, you have nothing. But as the last pages of Julianne's life turned to ash, Detective Miller just shook his head, sadly. It doesn't matter, Senator. We already have a complete digital copy. Every page was photographed the moment my officers retrieved it from that motel room. While your son's thugs were driving our star witnesses here, we were busy getting warrants. The color drained from the senator's face. He looked at his son, at the state troopers, at the smoldering ashes of the journal. He looked at the empire he had built on secrets and lies, and he saw it all turning to dust. It was over. The troopers moved in, cuffing a stunned, defeated Cal Hadley. He didn't resist. He just stared at Marcus Thorne, his eyes empty. The prince had been dethroned as they led him away. Detective Miller walked over to Leo and Sarah. He used a small tool to snip their zip ties. You two have had a rough couple of days, he said, a hint of a smile on his tired face. You did a brave thing. A reckless, stupid thing, he added, but brave nonetheless. You gave Julianne Maxwell her voice back. Leo rubbed his raw wrists, looking at the smoldering incinerator. The journal was gone, but it didn't matter. The truth was out. It had been spoken, recorded, and documented. It had been made real. The public exposure, the scandal, the fall from grace, it was all about to begin. The Hadley dynasty had crumbled, brought down by a forgotten wallet, a hidden journal, and the courage of a few ordinary people who refused to let a ghost stay buried. The cinematic payoff was complete, not with a bang, but with the quiet, satisfying click of handcuffs. The autumn that followed was a season of revelations. The arrest of Cal Hadley and the subsequent investigation into his father sent shockwaves through the state. The story was a media sensation, a feeding frenzy of headlines about power, corruption, and a 30-year-old murder. The Hadley name, once a symbol of prestige, became synonymous with disgrace. Leo and Sarah watched it all from a distance. Two reluctant heroes in a story that had taken on a life of its own. They had given their statements, handed over the wallet, and then retreated from the storm. The world saw them as key witnesses, but they saw themselves as something else, keepers of a promise. Cal Hadley's trial was swift. Faced with Marcus Thorne's eyewitness testimony, the recorded confession, and the damning contents of the journal, he took a plea deal. He would lead them to Julianne's body in exchange for life in prison without the possibility of parole, sparing him the death penalty. The senator, stripped of his power and influence, was charged with obstruction of justice and witness tampering. He died of a heart attack before his case could go to trial. A broken man in a world that no longer feared him. On a cold, grey morning in November, Leo stood with Sarah on a windswept hill overlooking the town of Northwood. They were in the local cemetery, a place of old, tilting headstones and ancient oak trees. A small group of people were gathered around a newly dug grave. There was no family left to mourn Julianne Maxwell, so her town, the one that had betrayed her in life, had come to finally honor her in death. They had found her exactly where Cal had said she would be. In a shallow, unmarked grave in the woods behind the Hadley estate, the silver locket Sarah remembered from the beach photograph was still around her neck. Sarah had designed the headstone herself. It was simple, elegant, made of polished white marble. It read, Julianne Maxwell, 1971 to 1991, a bird set fairer below, the words. She had carved the image of a sparrow, its wings spread wide, taking flight, a perfect replica of the sketch from the first page of the journal. After the service, As the small crowd dispersed, Leo and Sarah remained. The sky was the color of lead, threatening snow. A profound sadness hung in the air, but it was a clean sadness, a grief that could finally be expressed. "Thank you, Leo," Sarah said softly, not looking at him. Her eyes fixed on the headstone. "For everything. I couldn't have done it. Without you, you would have," he replied. Sooner or later, the truth has a way of making itself known. He thought about the man he had been just a few months ago, trudging along the side of a highway, invisible, his life a string of regrets. Finding that wallet had changed everything. It had given him a purpose, a reason to be more than the sum of his mistakes. He wasn't just a parolee anymore. He was the man who had helped solve a 30-year mystery. He had a new story to tell himself about who he was. He still had the $500 from the wallet. He'd tried to give it to the state, but they'd told him to keep it. Finders keepers. He planned to use it to enroll in a mechanics course at the new vocational school, a new start. "What will you do now?" he asked Sarah. She managed a small, sad smile. "I'm selling the shop. My husband and I are moving away to the coast. I need to be somewhere I can see the ocean, somewhere with a bigger sky." She was leaving Northwood, just as she and Julianne had planned to do all those years ago. A bittersweet healing. They stood in silence for a while longer, the cold wind whipping around them. The first flakes of snow began to fall, dusting the white marble of the headstone. "It's not fair," Sarah whispered, a single tear tracing a path down her cold cheek. All those years she lost, all the paintings she never got to paint. The life she never got to live, for what? For some spoiled boy's pride. Leo had no answer for that. There was no making sense of the tragedy. There was only the quiet, haunting reflection on the cost of truth. The cost had been entire life. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the small, ornate brass key. Key 217. The key to the locker. He had kept it as a reminder. He walked to the grave and knelt, placing the key gently on the soft earth in front of the headstone. A final symbolic returning of her property. "Rest now, Julianne," he whispered, to the silent ground as they walked away, leaving the solitary grave to the falling snow. Leo felt the lingering emotional echo of the story he had stumbled into. It was a story of darkness, of power that corrupts, and of the terrible secrets that people bury. But it was also a story of light, of a friendship that transcended death, of a truth that refused to stay silent, and of the quiet courage of ordinary people. He knew he would carry the ghost of Julianne Maxwell with him for the rest of his days. A tragic reminder of the cost of truth, but also a testament to the enduring power of a voice that, against all odds, had finally been heard. The snow fell harder, blanketing the town and the cemetery, covering the old wounds with a fragile layer of white, a chance for a clean, new beginning.